What really happens after you downsize? What might it feel like? What will the experience be for you when you've chosen to have less stuff and you follow through on that decision? This is a full-length version of my Less is Less, thank goodness, trio. A 3-in-1 about things that I've experienced when I've had less, fewer things, sometimes bare bones. Not only about stuff, but also about the thoughts and commitments in my head. From traveling lighter, very light, to cutting back on expectations of myself. This little series, put together in this one video, explores how downsizing, making a commitment to owning less stuff and following through, can open all kinds of doors in your life. Or so it did in mine. As always, no tips here, personal stories about how owning less, almost nothing in some instances, brought me unexpected joy, new adventures, and a whole different look at life. Let me get going. Knowing me, I'll get into my story and I'll forget to ask you to subscribe. It really helps my channel if you do that, so I'd appreciate it if you hit that button. And a like, those always give me big encouragement and tell me on the darker days just to keep going along this YouTube trail. Chapter 1, from trail life to senior life, and boy do I have a story. Things can happen when you're downsized, and you may just have the capacity to maximize what the world brings to you. Years ago now, I walked from Georgia to Maine. I was a thru hiker on the Appalachian Trail. It was a lot of miles. My trail name was Silver. I bet you know why. This is a story about my hiking companion in the first stages of my walk. You might gasp, but he was 90. That's 90. You didn't hear me wrong. He was 90. An old man. And I didn't choose him to hike with. It was an accident, really. And then he kind of chose me. And much as I pushed him away because I was hell-bent on getting to Maine on my own 2 feet, he stuck to me like glue. And so by happenstance and his persuasion, plus my tendency to be persuaded, we set out together. And together, we learned about stuff, things, necessities, fluff. We found out for each of us what had value, what could be given up, and what we needed to stay alive. Yeah, this is a story about downsizing and figuring out what matters. And it was a very individual thing. This little story of mine today is video number 1 in a trio that's about living less is less. That's my philosophy about life these days, what I found works for me. And I will say less is less, thank goodness. But here's the thing. For me, that's not about a small retired life. I want less so I can have a big life. Energized, lively, thoughtful, creative, with new adventures. And that's what this story is all about. My experience walking to Maine from Georgia, it taught me a lot about living with less and having less be the thing that made for big. And stay tuned for the end of this story because something happened that you could never predict. And it was about having a big life from less. Time to hit the trail. I didn't at all plan on hiking with a 90-year-old, or anyone really. His name was Pawpaw. By chance, he and I got delivered to the trailhead one sunny winter day at the same time in the same vehicle. No one else. We hopped out, and since there was just 2 of us, maybe even the only 2 that day because it was so early in the season, together we made our way to the rock that marks the beginning of the trail. And at that point, I let him disappear out of sight, and I sauntered towards the first shelter. It was maybe 2 or 3 miles up the trail. I didn't care that day to go very far. It was late in the day already, and with winter, the sun was fast falling. And I wasn't used to the routines of setting up camp, getting water, getting things sorted out, and I knew that would take some time. Evidently, I had made the mistake of telling this 90-year-old gentleman my plan. I arrived at the shelter, and there he was, eating his dinner, munching away like he was supposed to be there. At that time of my life, I was at a crossroads. I had no idea what I was going to do going forward. And then, as it happened, much of my stuff got stolen, but as luck would have it, it was covered by renter's insurance. So after I got compensated, it was enough money for me to take a trip on the trail. And I'd always wanted to do a long hike like that. I don't know why, but it had kind of stuck in my head. Pawpaw, on the other hand, that was his name. He told me he'd checked the forecast, saw the sun was shining, and it would be for the next 5 days. And he drove to the trail. His daughters had wanted him to move in with them. He wasn't having any of it. So yes, he fled his life. And there we were. He eating bits and pieces, dry, from a package of freeze-dried camping food, horrible stuff, and me with no idea how to set up my evening. Pawpaw mentioned something like he'd gone to fetch water already, and I thought, oh, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. What did I know? It was my first night out. So off I went. As I headed down the little trail to get some water from the brook, I passed a mess of debris, a brand new crushed tent, ripped, food scattered. I could tell it had been all pawed through by a bear. That was stuff at the beginning of the trail in the worst kind of way. I assume that person gave up day one, but I was hell-bent I wasn't going to. But that did give me pause. And that brings me to what I had with me. My pack, though it felt like a ton to me, it only weighed 38 pounds, which was one of the lighter first day packs on the trail in those days. Most people weighing in at the same time as me had packs in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. One guy even had 2 packs. Crazy, I thought. I had basics with me. No change of clothes, but lots of layers. About right to match the conditions that we were hiking in. I knew that because I was somewhat experienced. I'd been hiking backpacking for years. Nothing like this, though. And Pawpaw, what about him? Well, he thought about his stuff too. But his thinking went a little bit differently from mine. He recognized that the way to go would be kind of ultralight, but the implementation was not exactly on target. He had a much lighter pack than I did, and I don't know if you've ever seen a lightweight backpack, but they pare the weight down by making the buckles itty-bitty, and that poses a problem for seniors. Pawpaw couldn't put on his own pack. Well, he could get his arms in the harness, but he couldn't do anything up. And what he had in that pack was just as revealing about him as mine was about me. He had a leather golf jacket, a pair of leather gloves, a very heavy LL Bean rain jacket, and one of those old-fashioned flannel sleeping bags. You know, the kind that are really bulky and they weigh a ton. One of those. All jammed into this little ultralight pack. That was Pawpaw. You probably know something about me, but who was Pawpaw, apart from the fact that he was 90? His work life began at 17. He persuaded his parents to sign off on letting him enlist in the Navy. He was a minor, and off he went. And what did they assign him to do? All day, mop the decks on the ship. As it so happened at that time, the Navy was having trouble recruiting for places on submarines. They couldn't get any volunteers. But Pawpaw, he was all in it. No more mopping floors. They placed him in a submarine, and they put him in the communications room. And what did he do? He did Morse code. That was his job. And that submarine, they were stalking ships in Japanese harbors. This was before World War II. And as Pawpaw explained, those submarines were just wider than your arms. Narrow, scary places. They'd take hits and their food would go bad. That was life aboard the submarine. And there was Pawpaw tapping away. Morse code. In fact, as he spoke, everything, he tapped out on his knee in Morse code. I watched him with his fingers. And there he was on the trail. I got a little sketch about his life that very first night. And no, I didn't have any wish to hang out with him. And I figured he'd get up before me in the morning and off he'd go and I'd never see him again. Just what I needed, I thought. So what happened? I woke up late. I'm not an early riser, and I was tired, beat from just getting on the trail. And there he was, sitting on the edge of the shelter, biding his time, not doing a whole lot of anything. He'd done with his breakfast, he'd got his water. He was just waiting until I woke up, had my own breakfast, drank some coffee, and then we'd go together. He had decided that. I guessed I had to go along. So we walked for a little bit, lugging the packs. The pack seemed so heavy and I felt like a slug. I thought, I'll never make this. I tried again and again to shake him. Perhaps that first day we didn't even have lunch together. I was trying that hard not to be around him. I was in a space in my life where I was tired of taking care of people. I felt like I'd taken care of people for decades, and I had. And this was to be a time for me. No way was I going to hang out with a 90-year-old. But as we came to early afternoon and I had deliberately lagged behind him, I could see him up ahead, staggering up a long hill. Staggering. And he was that ashy gray color that told me there must be a heart issue. At that point, it looked like I might be the only resource he could have between him and meeting his maker. So I flagged him down. And what did he say? Silver, I have a pacemaker. And I thought, oh, Lordy. Oh, Pawpaw, catch your breath. We're going to sit for a moment. So we sat for a moment and I made him drink some water. I slowed down myself. And then I told him, Pawpaw, we're going to walk to that oak tree. That's what we're going to focus on right now. So we both got up and we started to walk. We got to that oak tree. After that oak tree, I pointed out a rock and I said to him, Pawpaw, we're going to walk to that rock. And so we walked to the rock. And that's how we proceeded up that long hill. I got Pawpaw to the top and I dragged myself up under my heavy pack, feeling like my feet were being driven into the ground. But we made it. We set up camp a couple miles beyond that, as was my plan. And Pawpaw, he put his tarp thingy right next to mine. It was clear we weren't going to get separated that night. He had decided somehow or other, no matter what I did, we were going to be a twosome. Oh well, I didn't have the energy to argue at that point. Next morning, I woke up to muffled sounds coming from the pile of tarp where Pawpaw was sleeping. His whole rig had collapsed onto him. Not only that, he'd stepped on his glasses and they were smashed. And he was short-sighted, very short-sighted. I think you can tell I'm pulling my hair out even remembering. But now I had a problem on my hands. I had to make sure he got off the trail safely. Without his glasses, he was not in a safe condition. Problem is, we were 2 days in any direction from getting off the trail. Nonetheless, we gathered our stuff and set off. I got used to the idea that he'd probably park himself right next to me that night, and so he did. Again, I didn't want to do a lot of miles. I wasn't in shape, and I had to get used to the whole scene. The following day, I could hear and feel the sound of rain, drenching rain, and it was cold. I said, Pawpaw, we've got to get out of here. We've got to get you some help. You have to get off the trail. Your glasses have to be fixed. You're not in a condition to be out here. So we set out, but soon the cold rain started to pour. Now the thing about Pawpaw, he couldn't hear either. He had hearing aids, but he didn't have really acute hearing. He couldn't hear the storm coming. You know how it is when a strong rainstorm comes in? It has a very particular sound. And you can hear the leaves rustling as it comes closer, and the rustling gets louder. He missed all of that because it wasn't compatible with his hearing. At least he hadn't stepped on his hearing aids. So there was that. And then I found out that although he brought a cell phone, he didn't know how to use it. So I had to do it for him, and I was bound to deliver him to the spot where he could be picked up by the hostel folks and taken to a warm and dry place. And in the meantime, there we were in the drenching rain. Pawpaw not hearing the rain coming in, not being able to get into his pack, not being able to see, in a leather golf jacket and leather gloves. And there was I in the position of thinking I probably had to rescue him from this situation. It was not good. Anyway, in the process of putting him in his pack, because he was unable to do it himself, I got drenched with cold water. And then I knew I'd need as much of a rescue as he did. So I was glad to be picked up by the hostel folks as well. And here I was, only 3 days into my trip, and it seemed to be unraveling with must-dos, should-tos, have-tos. We rested up at the hostel for a day or two while he got his glasses fixed. In the meantime, he was working on me. He had decided the only way he could make this through hike happen for him, to go all the way to Maine, was to come with me. And I said, no. I had my own plan. I didn't really want to have a hiking companion, and I didn't want to be taking care of someone. And here I was already in that mode, almost by accident, against, it seemed, my will. He begged, he pleaded, he cried. And I kept insisting I wanted to go alone. Finally, I said, okay, Pawpaw, this is what we're going to do. I made it right with myself. I told him the only way you can hike with me is if you get proper gear. I can't have you along with the gear you have now, and you have to be able to put your own pack on. That was part of his bargain. I had discovered when I noticed him eating dry bits out of backpacker's pantry freeze-dried meal that he didn't bring a stove. He said he couldn't afford the weight. And he had a very laborious method of sanitizing his water too, which meant he wasn't drinking very much. So here's where my part of the bargain came in. I told him I would be filtering the water. I would filter as much as he needed. And I would boil water too, so he could have that in his meals. I would sweep out the mice droppings in the shelter so he wouldn't be sleeping in mice feces. He had to hike on my plan, and this is what else he had to do. His entire job in this deal, he was going to tell the young people his stories. That was my bargain. Yep, he was going to tell young people his submarine stories. And he was a really good storyteller. That was the deal. So the hostel folks took him to the nearby outfitters, and they were great. They must have spent a couple hours with him. He got a pack that fit him perfectly, and it wasn't as bulky a pack as most folks had. He got himself a lighter sleeping bag, one that wouldn't soak in water like his first one had, and his treat for himself was a technical jacket. Light, with a little bit of insulation. It was perfect for hiking in that weather and for wearing around the fire at night. He was so proud of that jacket. And thank goodness for me, no more golf jacket or drippy leather gloves. Another experienced hiker took him to the supermarket and showed him how to pick out nutrient-dense foods that would pack nicely. So no more freeze-dried backpacking meals without water. He stocked up on individual packages of Spam, World War II, peanut butter, bagels, I forget what else. And yes, we got his glasses fixed. And so we set off again. And did I keep trying to get rid of him? Yes. And what happened? Either he would start crying or I would start crying. It just didn't work. And I finally realized for me, I didn't come to the trail to choose what was going to happen to me. I had come to the trail to have whatever was going to happen to me. So I settled into the whole idea a bit better than I had at first. I was never quite comfortable with it, but we trudged on. It's time to wind this back to stuff. Because as I mentioned, traveling on any of the long trails, it's all about stuff, actually about numbers, weight and quantity. How much does your pack weigh? And how big is it? Pawpaw and I had each downsized to our packs before we came on the trail. Some decisions had been made. Clearly, we had made different decisions. He had to have his special University of Florida hat. And I had wanted to come to the trail with a kind of analytical analysis about what each of my items weighed and what it would do for me. I left out any duplicate outfit. Paw left out his stove. I could carry a few more warm items because mine were light. Paw was hampered by his old-fashioned flannel sleeping bag, which sucked up rainwater, and his heavy leather golf jacket, which pretty much did the same. So what happened next in our time together? He was totally a new person. It was like he put that new pack on and he pulled himself up a bit. He was thrilled with it, and he started to suck up information. He integrated it and went with it. It was almost startling. Here he was 90, and he found out so much about himself once he got the right baseline to spring from. It turns out he was an extraordinary athlete, and he didn't know that about himself. He could way out-hike me. He had a magnificent long stride. It was such a pleasure to see. He thrived in himself. I had a chance to meet his grandson and the grandson's girlfriend. Oh, they were so lovely. And Paw became fresh and filled. His wife had died not too long before, and they had been together like 70 years. And he'd had to care for her during the months and years before she died. And you could see him coming alive again. He even said something about it. His new space. And yes, his newfound athleticism at 90 was a sight to behold. I could go on and on with my stories about the Appalachian Trail. I could say, in short, what you downsize to matters. It's kind of predictive of where you might go. Less is less, and that can set you up for something grand, a shift in your being, even if not a 2,500-mile hike. These days, my hikes are a lot shorter. My hair is a little bit more silver, and I have a new companion. Same hat, though. Okay, let's go. But let me tell you the rest of the story. 3 weeks into our little journey up the trail, I had to say goodbye to Paw. Here's what happened. One night while I was fetching water, he split his head open on a beam in a remote shelter. Blood everywhere. Just the two of us were there. We got help. That was fine. Another whole long story. And then we were back on the trail. Paw was able. He wanted to keep up with me. And so we went onwards. Perhaps a week after that, though, his leg began to hurt him. And I was really concerned about having another search and rescue. It's really not fair to search and rescue volunteers to be going out into remote areas when you're injured and the odds of needing a rescue are high. That's my view. So I called his lovely grandson and asked him to come and fetch Paw. And he did. As it turned out, Paw had osteoporosis and his bones were getting a little bit fragile. So I made the right call. Oh, but I wept. I wept and wept. I'll bet he did too. My sorrow, it went on for days. I knew not why. I had tried to get rid of him for so long, and here I missed him. As for me, I fumbled along the trail for the next few months. I was out there 6 months in all. And yes, I got from Georgia to Maine, walked all that way, but I didn't reach the end. Perhaps 150 miles short of the end, my leg gave out. Actually, it wouldn't go another inch. It was like the Tin Man running out of oil. I got all stiff. Nothing would work all of a sudden. As it turns out, the injury is permanent, and I could never lift that kind of weight again. I was never able to finish my through hike. And that brings me grief even now. But I haven't told you the rest of the story. It gets better, because there was more Paw. Several years after I got off the trail, it must have been 4 or 5, I got a call from Paw. I can't remember exactly what the context was, but I imagine it was out of the blue. And so he and I talked. And what do you know? At 95, he was out on the trail again, trying to hike from Georgia to Maine. And yes, he happened to mention his equipment. He was so proud of that pack. It's as though once he owned it, he had to be that person. It gave him at 95. But 95 wasn't even the same as 90. The very first day out, evidently he fell. Luckily for him, there were other people on the trail, including a doctor, so he got out safely. But that pretty much ended his ambitions for doing any kind of long-distance walking. At 95, yes, he had to hang up his pack. Pawpaw, if you're up there, I'm thinking about you. I can see you striding across the heavens. How many miles must have you covered by now? I did shed pack weight as I went along, but I don't think that's the most important part of this story, except I dumped my camera. So of course, I have no photos to show you. And I'm sorry about that. But when you're downsizing, thinking about weight and volume, how much you might really need to go forward to give you an adventure, that's what happens sometimes. Later on, you might have lost something you wanted. Chapter 2, Downsizing Expectations After 60. Less isn't always about things. Sometimes the stuff we're carrying around is inside us. I've downsized my demands on myself too. I'm sure some of you have watched flamingos, and maybe you appreciate them as much as I do. Long legs, elegant, serene in the water, fabulous in lush shades of coral. That's not me at all. I'm definitely not elegant, a little on the shorter side. I'm clumsy with my fingers, and my limbs, they've lost quite a bit of flexibility. Long neck, yeah, I kind of go in that direction, but the long legs, oh, those I would have died for when I was a teenager. But no, that's not me. And as for being comfortable in the water, that's not me either. As I get older, it's been easier to become real about things like that, about not trying to be a flamingo when I'll never be one. Now, in my 70s, I'm finally getting the idea that I really don't need to. There's some grace in who I am right now. I used to think I had to be good at everything. Cooking, learning new languages, analyzing poems, doing crossword puzzles, and the yard work. But this phase of my life now is about getting real, letting go some of the ideas I had about myself and my personal possibilities. And that's not about giving up. It's about being real. That's my topic today, and I'm going to share some examples. I think you'll be surprised. Let me get on it. Before I get going, downsize your to-do list and hit subscribe. And like, I always appreciate those. They give me encouragement in the darker days. Because gosh knows this is a lot of work, but you didn't hear that from me. Next week though, I'll tell you that story. When I moved into this little house, as you know, I downsized almost everything I owned. What I didn't downsize, and it's taking me much longer, is my feelings about myself. My expectations, what I thought I would be one day, or maybe what I should. Gradually, one by one, I'm letting those things go too, and it's so freeing. Just a quick example. All my life, I wanted to be a better cook. I've bought recipe books so I can up my game. I was a good cook for the food I liked, but I was never a good cook in the sense of entertaining. I don't really have to cook for anyone else. I just have to please myself. This is beginning to stick in my brain. Oh, it's taken a few decades. But now, it's pretty obvious I only have to cook for myself. And I enjoy my own cooking. I guess that's what matters. So I'm letting go. That's quite a new thing for me. Let me summarize the notion I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to give you several examples. My dream of being at least a respectable cook, making recipes that other folks could enjoy, and doing that successfully. That's an example of how trimming down the stuff can also trim down expectations. In my experience, that's a marvelous offshoot of downsizing. It's about letting go of pressure, performance, and perfectionism. That's quite the challenge for me. Work in progress. But that's the thing about downsizing, yes? It's a gift that keeps on giving. It makes so much room for growth. but I'm going to give you some more examples of that. This video is one of a trio about living less is less and really enjoying it. My first video in the series, it's about my trip on the Appalachian Trail and how I hiked with a 90-year-old, 90, for several weeks, and what that experience was like. Now, long-distance hiking, if you care to know, it's all about downsizing stuff. How much your pack weighs and how big it is. That summarizes about 50% of discussions en route, especially in the first few days. And you can see how that worked out in my video, The Beauty of Not Much. I mentioned at the end of that video that although I had walked all the way from Georgia to Maine, and I'd been out there for 6 months, I never made it to the end. I got injured so badly, I'm not able to carry a heavy pack anymore. It's taking years to get over the idea that I can't really do that. I mean, I actually can't do that. I would so have loved to finish, to have that feather in my cap, but it wasn't going to happen. And I'm more settled in now to the idea that it never can. For me, now hiking is about short little hikes with my current hiking companion. That would be Brecky. It's been hard to let go, that one, but gradually it's dissolving from my life, giving me space for new kinds of adventures. So yes, I've downsized that fantasy as the years have gone by. Still a little bit left. And then there's the matter of my weight. Now, it used to be I was a dancer, and I danced a lot of hours a day. I also used to figure skate. What did that all mean? I could eat whatever I wanted, and I only weighed 106 pounds. That went on for 20, 30 years. Come to more advanced adulthood, and you all know how it goes. The old 106-pound thing and all that activity, it kind of goes by the wayside a little bit. And then the body does this thing, it's not the same. So in the past few years, after I moved into this little house, and I've started to trim down my expectations about myself, I've had to settle for a little bit larger than my fantasy. And I've also had to give myself new guidelines that protect my current health. You can see my thoughts about that in my video about the mind diet, which I've used to eat healthy and still lose weight. And it's worked out marvelously. But I have come to realize just lately that 106 pounds is not returning, nor is 120, 125. Those days are done. My body just won't do that anymore. It's a fact of my life. So now I've come to be glad of being in the lower 130s. That's a healthy weight for someone my age, and a good BMI. This too is a work in progress, but I'm learning to be satisfied with that. It does seem to give me a very healthy balance of nutrients, being fed, being satisfied, and having a healthy body. Perfectionism? No. Pressure? It's abating. And performance? That part of my life is gone. The dancing and the figure skating. That doesn't have to be for my body. So here we are. I've really downsized my expectations about myself. I'm not sure I could have arrived at this conclusion unless I had really cut down on my stuff and moved into this little house, which has given me place to relax and be me. It's such a treat. Seniors are often told that volunteer work is a good thing, and I know many seniors really enjoy it, but I had to give it up. It doesn't work for me. Until a couple of years ago, I was teaching English to a couple of lovely young women from South Asia. It was a treat. Especially during COVID, we had some marvelous conversations, each of us from our isolated locations. At the same time, Brecky and I were trail ambassadors at a national park. He was a bark ranger, totally suited him. What was our gig? We walked the trails in the park. I carried the park's first aid kits and an emergency radio. I was to greet visitors as I walked, and Brecky was to get a few strokes. In the end, it became nerve-wracking, and I was spending my Sunday afternoons trying to get people to leash their dogs, not harass wildlife, and to leave nature be so its bounty could be seen by everyone. One year the conditions were right for the earth along those woody trails to blossom with mushrooms. There must have been 100 different varieties. I know we had visitors who had never seen a mushroom before. I so wanted them to be able to see that extravagant display. Mushrooms of every color and size, from teeny weeny ones to big platters. And the sun's rays would fall on them and light them up. Oh, I so wanted visitors to have a glimpse of that rich world too. But alas, those fungi were getting plucked away in bagfuls. It really disappointed me with the universe. So I let go that volunteer position when I realized how uncomfortable I was. It's been very hard for me to do that, recognizing my limitations. And I've realized in the end, I really need all my time for me right now. I want to be creative. And sometimes that takes hours that might otherwise have been spent volunteering. That's where I am with that role in my life at the moment. The idea that volunteering is a grand thing for seniors. It is, I believe, just not this one. In the years since I moved into this little house, I've also downsized my expectations about what I'm comfortable with as far as family drama. Little by little, I've peeled it away. I found that I don't like to deal. I need the space without it. I need room to grow. Even a little bit of family drama sets me off, takes over my life. I can't afford that anymore. So I've downsized that segment of my life, and I will tell you, it's been a great relief. I'm so pleased with my sense of freedom now that I'm not entangled every day. Let me say a few things about my education. In the last year or two, and this is definitely a work in progress, I have a very different view of my education than I used to. And it goes something like this. I have a Princeton PhD, quite remarkable really. It still surprises me. On the face of it, it represents intellectual agility. Of course it does. It's an amazing feat to have earned that piece of paper. But a PhD from an elite university comes loaded with expectations from other people and from me. It has built into it this idea that you're absolutely brilliant, that you have a high IQ, that you're very sharp mentally, that you're clever, that you can be incisive, that you can analyze quickly. That's how most people would characterize someone who has a degree like that. But that's a very difficult thing to live up to. Extraordinary pressure comes with it. A bias towards high achievement and a sense of failure if you can't get there. A need for perfectionism because you're used to your mind being sharp, detailed, thorough, organized. That's a heck of a way to live. As I downsized and as I got rid of stuff, I got rid of ideas about myself in that regard too. I began to realize that there's a reason I won prizes, awards, and a distinguished degree. And it wasn't just about intellectual acuity. It was about my imagination, my creativity, the ideas that I had that no one else could have, that came from me. I didn't get showered with all that opportunity because of a thinky, sterile brain. I got there because I have a spark that's different from everyone else's, and that was acknowledged. And now in my later years, now that some of my worries have receded and my life is a bit more spacious, it's given me room to develop those creative threads. Also, to admire how my mind works and have that be okay. As I let go some of these ideas about myself, especially the need to perform and the need to perfect, I've given myself space to be. There's a lot less pressure in the place I am now. And I don't think it's just because I'm retired, whatever that is. It's because I have room and I have space to think differently about myself. And I'm much realer about my possibilities. And those flamingos, much as I enjoy watching them, how pretty and pink they are, their long necks, and those leggy legs. Oh, I wish I had those as a teenager. But I'm not there now. Living in a swamp? Nah. And you know what? They sound kind of ugly to me. I'm finding my voice just now, but I have a feeling it's quite a bit prettier than a flamingo's. And perhaps I am quite exotic in my history, but I'm not a flamingo kind of exotic, if you know what I mean. Lessons learned. Chapter 3, In the Comfort of a Tree. This is a story about how downsizing brought me to a transcendent understanding of the universe we live in, a real grasp that I'm not isolated, even if I own nothing or practically nothing, but just because I am. I woke today to the sound of pouring rain on my rooftop. It's a gloomy day, dark, oppressive, low-hanging clouds. I hate days like this, and then the anxiety builds about what's in store for the rest of the day. Perhaps some flooding, perhaps we'll never see sunshine, perhaps my mood will settle in and it'll muck up the rest of my day. Gray, depressing, overbearing. But here I am, and I'm here to tell you a story and my thoughts about exactly that. A moment where the world felt like it had nothing to offer me. And then suddenly it did. A whole new way to see what was there all the time. After I downsized, it seemed the hard part was over. The hellish decision-making, the anxiety that I might get rid of something I might need or miss. Sweet memories as I went along, and some not so happy. It's all very difficult and complicated. We seniors know that, yes? Whether we're in the process, we're finished with it, or we're just getting started. That pretty much summarizes the task of downsizing. What I never expected from downsizing was what happened next. In this little trio of videos, I've given you some examples of that. What happened to me in the space that comes after downsizing. Less set me free in so many ways. No, it didn't make more. I didn't want more. I needed the feeling of less, to have space in my life. Now, I'm not going to provide you with tips. I'm not a tips kind of gal. Besides, we seniors, we probably have all the tips in our heads we need from a lifetime of can-do. So yeah, no tips from me. Do I have experiences? Yes. And that's what I have today, a story. A story about how once you aren't so insulated by stuff, you're freed up to find something new in the universe that might replenish and nourish you. And you might just be surprised how that comes your way. I promised you a story. Let me get to it. Before I set out on this tale about the juicy magic of the universe, I know I'll forget to ask you to subscribe, so please do. And a like, especially on dark days like this. Those can really lift the moment. The first story in this trio of stories about downsizing and its aftermath covered my adventures on the Appalachian Trail with a 90-year-old as my companion. That was a memorable few weeks. My story is a little vignette, a moment on that big adventure. But I think you'll find that it has a lot to say about the implications of downsizing for all of us. I mentioned in that story that backpacking, especially through hiking or long-distance walking, is an extreme version of downsizing. You get down to almost nothing. Why? You gotta lug it 2,500 miles, and even one step can be painful. I had nothing on me, just who I was, and a few things in my pack. You'll have to hear my story in that video, The Beauty of Not Much, to find out what happened. I had to say goodbye to Pawpaw and proceed alone, one foot in front of the other, mile after mile after mile. Nothing but me. It would feel very vulnerable at times. And soon, perhaps a week or two later, my mood was settled in to about the same as the weather today. But for me, it was about inside. I felt gloomy, bereft, down on my resources, stripped, bare, overhung with anxiety. I gave up for a moment. There was a big old pine there. And I love me some big old pines. The pine needles scattered around underneath, they're so soft to sit on, and they always look like no one has ever sat there. And then those big trees kind of embrace and envelop, protect, offer a quiet spot. At least they do to me. So I plunked myself under a big old pine tree in that condition, drank my water, felt my emptiness, wondered what I was going to do. at a loss for me in the moment. I looked up, despairing, trying to find an answer, and I did. Because as I looked up, I could see the tree responding to me. I was kind of freaked out, to tell you the truth. I could see the branches dip slightly and the needles turn just a little bit towards me, facing me, as though to embrace me. No, I thought, that's not possible. No, that's not how trees are. I'm making this up. I was so spooked, I jumped up. I ran up the trail a bit so I could look at the tree. And I kept thinking to myself, is there something wrong with my mind here? I must be crazy. I can't have a tree giving me a hug. Trees don't do that. But I looked at the tree. I reassured myself that it was in fact a tree. And the darn thing, it seems to keep responding to me. So I went back and I had a little bit more of a sit. I sat there. And I looked up at the tree some more. Something was going on there. Again, I jumped up, ran up the trail, checked that the tree was actually a real tree and that my mind wasn't playing tricks on me. It wasn't. So I sat back under that tree and got my life back. In not much time at all, I was able to travel up the trail. I never looked at trees the same again. Yes, they speak to me. Not every tree, but many. Some are instantly my friends. Some I have to hang out with a bit longer. And I do have special affinity for the big ones. Do I know anything about trees? No, almost nothing. Can I identify them? Rarely. That's not what this is about or what it ever became. It was a moment of being nothing, of recognizing I was nothing, that I had nothing. I just had me. And the universe helped me with that. It stepped up and offered me a gift, a huge gift of possibility, a world I'd never even noticed. Maybe by now you're thinking I'm crazy. And I was crazy in that moment, and that I was hallucinating, that I was just making it all up because I was so lonely and frustrated and out of my mind somehow. But I might have thought that too. But I'll tell you what happened. At that very time, research was being done on trees as social creatures. My favorite book about that is a book that came out about 10 years later. It's by Peter Wohlleben, a German writer, but it's in English, and it's called The Hidden Life of Trees. I'll put the title in the description, but I'm not going to give you any link. Why? I know that there are copies in every public library. It's been a very popular book. So have at it there, either your state's e-library or your local little one. There's going to be a copy. I am quite sure of it. Anyway, that book talks about trees as social beings. It confirmed everything I discovered that day under that big old pine tree, when I saw it was wanting to take care of me. As it turns out, trees are really sensitive to other beings in their surroundings. They notice, they take care, they nourish, they feed, they respond. It was so wonderful to read that in Wohleben's book. But I knew that already. And I'm thinking that's there for you too. In my experience, it's the end result of downsizing and fitting yourself into that space when you're not so filled up with stuff. There's room there. There's room for growth, and there's room to notice something you might never have noticed before, and it just might fuel you for these later years of your life. I call it juicy magic from the universe. By the way, that's why I call this channel Tangerine Door and not something else. My door in reality doesn't happen to be tangerine, but I want a door to open for everyone. I want all my viewers to be able to claim a new way in somewhere that they haven't had before. That's the Tangerine Door, the way to juicy magic. Have you ever had an experience like that with a tree or some other context where you felt you were done, empty, resourceless. And then next thing you know, the world offered up. And there it was. You could go on. Even enjoy what was in front of you. Write about that in the comments. I love to read those, and I know others do too. If my 3 chapters spoke to you, share them with someone who's in the process of trying to let go. There's beauty in not much, and maybe that's not so little after all. And that's it from me for now. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll talk soon, all right? See you then.